My name is Marcus Sullivan, and I'm 24 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened 3 months ago, and I still wake up some mornings wondering if it was real. But the picture sits on my dresser now, and every time I look at it, I remember that night. The anger, the tearing, and then the impossibility of what I found the next morning. I grew up Catholic in Boston, the kind of Catholic where you go to Mass every Sunday because that's just what you do. My grandmother had rosaries hanging in every room, and my mother made sure I was confirmed when I turned 16. But by the time I hit college, I'd stopped going to church. It wasn't a dramatic rebellion or anything. I just drifted away. The prayers felt empty, the rituals seemed pointless, and I had better things to do on Sunday mornings. After college, I moved to Portland for a job in graphic design. The work was fine, the city was beautiful, but I was lonely in a way I couldn't quite articulate. I had coworkers I got drinks with sometimes, a few people I played basketball with on weekends, but no one I really talked to. My apartment was a studio in the Pearl District, small, expensive, and perpetually cold, despite the radiator that clanked all night. The picture came from my mother. She'd been on this Carlo Acutis kick for about 6 months. Every time we talked on the phone, she'd mention him, this Italian teenager who died of leukemia in 2006, who was now beatified by the Catholic Church. She'd send me articles about his miracles, YouTube videos about his life, stories about people who'd been healed through his intercession. Marcus, you should pray to him, she'd say. He was young like you. He understood technology. He was into computers. You'd relate to him. I'd listen politely and change the subject. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, but I had zero interest in praying to some dead teenager. The whole concept felt absurd to me. Why would God work through a kid who died almost 20 years ago? Why would prayers to him matter more than prayers to anyone else? But my mother was persistent. For my 24th birthday in September, she sent me a care package. Homemade cookies, a new scarf for the Portland cold, and a framed picture of Carlo Acutis. It was a formal photograph, the kind they'd taken for his beatification. A young man with dark hair, wearing a red polo shirt, with a gentle smile on his face. Under the picture, there was a prayer card with his official prayer on it. I'd put the picture on my bookshelf without much thought, tucked between a plant I kept forgetting to water and a stack of design magazines. I barely looked at it for weeks. It was just there. Another object in my apartment, another reminder of the faith I'd left behind. Things started falling apart in October. My girlfriend of 2 years, Jennifer, broke up with me. We'd been doing the long-distance thing since I moved to Portland. She was finishing medical school in Boston, and I'd thought we were solid. I'd been looking at engagement rings, actually, thinking I'd propose when she visited for Thanksgiving. But she ended it over a video call. "I can't do this anymore, Marcus," she said, her face pixelated on my laptop screen. "I need someone who's there, someone who's present. You're not just physically far away, you're emotionally distant. You've been distant for a long time." I tried to argue, tried to convince her we could make it work, but she'd made up her mind. The call ended, and I sat alone in my apartment with this hollow feeling in my chest, like someone had scooped out my insides. 2 weeks later, my company announced layoffs. My department was being restructured, they said. Budget cuts, they said. 12 of us were let go, including me. They gave me 2 weeks severance and a reference letter, and just like that, 4 years of work evaporated. I spent my days sending out resumes and getting rejection emails. Portland's design market was saturated, and everyone wanted someone with more experience or different skills. My savings started dwindling. I cut back on everything. Eating ramen most nights, canceling subscriptions, avoiding going out with the few friends I had. My mother called constantly. "Come home, Marcus," she'd say. "Stay with us while you figure things out. Your old room is still here." But going home felt like admitting defeat. I was supposed to be the one who'd made it, who'd moved to a cool city and built a career. Going back to Boston, back to my childhood bedroom, felt like erasing everything I'd tried to become. The loneliness got worse. Jennifer had been my anchor, the person I talked to every day. Without her, the silence in my apartment became oppressive. I'd come home from job interviews, the rare ones I got, and there'd be nothing. No one to call, no one to tell about my day. Just me and the sounds of my neighbors through the thin walls. I started resenting everything. I resented Portland for being so expensive. I resented the design industry for being so competitive. I resented Jennifer for giving up on us. I resented my mother for her constant concern, for her prayers that never seemed to help anything. And I started resenting God. It crept up slowly, this anger. At first, it was just frustration. Why was everything going wrong? but it deepened into something darker. If God existed, if God cared, why was my life falling apart? Why had I lost my job and my relationship in the same month? Why did I feel so completely alone? I stopped being polite about my mother's religious texts. When she'd send me prayers or saint quotes, I'd leave them on read. When she'd suggest I go to Mass, I'd tell her bluntly that I wasn't interested. Church hadn't helped me. Faith hadn't helped me. Prayer was just talking to an empty ceiling. The picture of Carlo Acutis sat on my bookshelf, and every time I saw it, I felt a spike of irritation. This was what my mother thought would help: praying to some teenager, asking a dead kid for miracles? It felt infantile, desperate, embarrassing. November rolled into early December. The weather turned freezing, and my apartment's heating barely worked. I was down to my last month of rent money. I had one promising job lead, a contract position at a startup, but they'd been still deciding for 3 weeks. On December 7th, a Thursday, I got the rejection email. We've decided to go with a candidate whose experience better aligns with our needs. I'd been so sure about that job. It was perfect for me. The right skills, the right role, the right salary. I'd already imagined accepting it, imagined the relief of having income again. I sat on my couch and felt something break inside me. Not sadness. I was past sadness. Just rage. Pure, white-hot rage at the unfairness of everything. At the cosmic joke my life had become. I looked around my apartment, at the empty ramen containers I hadn't thrown away, at the rejection emails filling my inbox, at the silence that had become my constant companion, and my eyes landed on that picture of Carlo Acutis on my bookshelf. Something in me snapped. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf. I grabbed the picture and the glass felt cold in my hands. I stared at Carlo's face, that peaceful, serene expression, like he'd never known suffering or disappointment, like everything had been easy for him. "You're supposed to be a miracle worker?" I said out loud, my voice harsh in the empty apartment. "You're supposed to help people? Where's my miracle? Where's my help?" The picture just stared back at me, that same gentle smile. The anger surged. I thought about my mother's endless faith, her insistence that prayer worked, that God had a plan, that saints interceded for us. It all felt like lies. Pretty lies we told ourselves to make the randomness of life bearable. "You're just paper," I said. "You're just a dead kid they turned into a story." I opened the frame. My hands were shaking, with anger, with something else I couldn't name. I pulled the picture out, leaving the glass frame on the shelf. The photograph was on thick cardstock, glossy and professionally printed. My mother had probably paid extra for the good quality. I held it in both hands. Carlo's face looked up at me. For a second, I hesitated. Some residual Catholic guilt, maybe. Some childhood memory of respecting holy things. But the anger was bigger than the guilt. I tore the picture. The sound of it ripping was loud in the quiet apartment, a harsh, violent sound. I tore it right down the middle, splitting Carlo's face in half. But I didn't stop there. The rage needed more. I tore those halves into quarters. Then I tore the quarters into smaller pieces. I kept tearing until the picture was confetti in my hands, until Carlo Acutis was reduced to dozens of fragments. I stood there breathing hard, pieces of the photograph scattered across my palms and falling to the floor. My heart was pounding. I felt sick and relieved at the same time. Sick at what I'd done, relieved to have destroyed something, to have acted on the anger instead of letting it eat me from the inside. The pieces fluttered to the ground around my feet. I looked down at them, bits of Carlo's face, fragments of his red shirt, pieces of the blue background. It looked like trash. It looked like exactly what I thought it was. Just paper, just ink, just meaningless symbols of a faith that had never done anything for me. I bent down and started gathering the pieces. I don't know why I bothered. Maybe some part of me knew I'd regret this. Maybe I just didn't want the mess on my floor. I collected all the fragments I could find, checking under the bookshelf and in the corners. It took several minutes to get them all. I put the torn pieces into an envelope I found in my desk drawer, a manila envelope about 9 by 12 inches. I sealed it and stared at it for a moment, feeling the adrenaline start to fade, feeling the first whispers of guilt creeping in. What had I done? I'd destroyed something my mother had given me, something she'd chosen carefully because she loved me and wanted to help. I'd torn up an image of a person the Catholic Church had declared blessed, a person millions of people prayed to, but the anger was still there, underneath the guilt. So what if I'd torn it? It was just paper. If Carlo Acutis was really a saint, if God really cared, A torn picture shouldn't matter. It was symbolic of everything I felt. Ripped apart, broken, destroyed. I put the envelope in my desk drawer and tried not to think about it. I made another cup of instant ramen for dinner and scrolled through job listings until the words blurred together. I went to bed around midnight, lying in the dark and listening to the radiator clank and the neighbors argue through the wall. I didn't pray that night. I hadn't prayed in months, but this night felt different. It felt like I'd burned a bridge, like I'd crossed some line that meant prayer wasn't even an option anymore. You can't pray when you've just torn up a saint's picture. That's not how it works. Sleep came eventually, fitful and broken. I dreamed about nothing I could remember. I woke up around 8 the next morning, Friday, December 8th. I remember the date because I'd later learn it was the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, a holy day in the Catholic Church. At the time, I had no idea. The morning was gray and cold. Rain pattered against my window. I lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, feeling the familiar weight of dread about the day ahead. More job applications to send, more rejection emails to read, more hours of silence in my apartment. I got up and made coffee. My routine was mechanical. I could do it half asleep. Fill the kettle, wait for it to boil, pour it over the grounds in my French press. The smell of coffee was one of the few comforts I had left. While the coffee steeped, I went to my desk to check my email on my laptop. Maybe there'd be a response to one of the applications I'd sent yesterday. Maybe something good would happen. I pulled out my desk chair and sat down. My eyes fell on the desk drawer, the one where I'd put the envelope with the torn pieces. Something made me pause. I'm not sure what. Curiosity, maybe. Or guilt. Or some instinct I couldn't name. I opened the drawer. The manila envelope was sitting there, exactly where I'd left it. I pulled it out, feeling its weight in my hands. It felt the same as it had last night, flat, with the slight bulk of paper pieces inside. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe I wanted to look at the destruction in the daylight, to face what I'd done. Maybe I was planning to throw it away and wanted to check one more time. Maybe something deeper was pulling at me. I unsealed the envelope and reached inside. My fingers touched smooth cardstock. I frowned and pulled out what was inside. The picture of Carlo Acutis slid into my hands, whole and intact. I stared at it. The photograph was perfect. No tears, no creases, no tape marks, nothing. Carlo's face looked up at me with that same gentle smile, his red shirt bright against the blue background. The cardstock was smooth and unblemished under my fingers. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I'd torn this picture. I'd ripped it into dozens of pieces. I'd spent minutes collecting every fragment. I'd put those pieces, not this whole picture, but pieces, into this envelope. I turned the photograph over, looking for some explanation. The back was blank and smooth. I held it up to the light, searching for seam lines or tape or any sign that it had been put back together. There was nothing. It was as intact as the day my mother had sent it to me. My hands started shaking. I set the picture down on my desk and looked back into the envelope, thinking maybe the torn pieces were still in there. Maybe I'd somehow grabbed a different picture, but the envelope was empty, just the faint smell of paper and nothing else. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. I picked up the picture again, examining it more closely. I remembered exactly how I'd torn it. Right down the middle first, splitting Carlo's face in half. There should be a line there, or a mark, or something. But his face was seamless, unblemished. The tear that had gone through his eyes, his nose, there was no trace of it. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I looked around my apartment as if someone might be there, as if this might be some elaborate prank. But I was alone. I'd been alone all night. No one had a key to my apartment. No one even knew I'd torn the picture. My mind raced through possibilities, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe I hadn't actually torn it. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But no. I remembered the sound of tearing too clearly, the feeling of the paper ripping in my hands, the pieces falling to the floor. Maybe I'd torn a different picture and this was the original still sitting somewhere, but I'd pulled this picture from the frame on my bookshelf. There was no other picture of Carlo Acutis in my apartment. Maybe someone had broken in during the night and replaced it. But that was absurd. Who would do that? How would they even know? And why? I went to my bookshelf and looked at the empty frame sitting there, the glass still reflecting the gray morning light. This confirmed it. I'd definitely taken the picture out, and there was only one picture. I returned to my desk and picked up the photograph again. My coffee was getting cold, forgotten. I couldn't take my eyes off the picture. Carlo's face seemed to look directly at me now, that smile no longer annoying but unsettling in its peace. I thought about last night, the anger, the words I'd said, the deliberate violence of tearing the picture. I'd been so certain it was meaningless, just paper and ink. I'd wanted to prove that it didn't matter, that there was no sacred power in images or saints or faith. But here it was, whole, impossible. I sat down again, the picture still in my hands. I noticed I was breathing fast, almost hyperventilating. I forced myself to slow down, to think clearly. There had to be an explanation. There was always an explanation. Maybe the paper had some kind of self-healing property, but that was ridiculous. Self-healing paper wasn't a thing, and even if it was, this was cardstock from a Catholic gift shop, not some advanced material. Maybe the tearing had been a dream. Maybe I dreamed the whole thing, come home from the rejection email and fallen asleep and dreamed tearing the picture. But I'd been awake. I knew I'd been awake, and I'd found the empty frame this morning, proof that I'd taken the picture out. I looked at the envelope again. Could I have put the whole picture in there last night and just thought I'd torn it? Some kind of fugue state or mental break? But I'd felt the pieces in my hands. I'd seen them scatter. I'd collected them one by one. The impossibility of it pressed down on me. I felt dizzy, like the ground had shifted under my feet. Everything I knew about how the world worked, cause and effect, the permanence of destruction, the laws of physics, all of it was suddenly in question. I thought about my mother's prayers, her faith in Carlo Acutis. He performs miracles, she'd said. He brings people back to God. I'd dismissed it all as wishful thinking, as the comfort of stories people told themselves. But I was holding evidence of something I couldn't explain. I stood up again and started pacing my small apartment. The picture was still in my hands. I couldn't seem to put it down. My mind kept circling back to the same impossible fact. This picture had been torn to pieces and now it was whole. I tried to remember if there was any moment, any second, where I might have been mistaken. When I'd gathered the pieces, had I somehow missed that it was actually still intact? No. I'd seen the torn edges, the fragmented face. When I'd put them in the envelope, had I been hallucinating? No. I'd been angry, but I'd been lucid, clear-headed even. My coffee maker beeped, pulling me out of my spiraling thoughts. The coffee had been ready for 10 minutes. I walked to the kitchen on unsteady legs and poured myself a cup, the routine action giving me something to focus on. I sat on my couch, the picture on the coffee table in front of me, and tried to drink my coffee. It tasted like nothing. I couldn't stop staring at Carlo's face. What did this mean? If this was real, and I couldn't find any explanation that made it not real, what was I supposed to do with it? The Catholic part of my brain, the part I'd tried to bury for years, whispered that this was a miracle. An actual, literal miracle. God or Carlo Acutis or some force beyond my understanding had restored this picture. Why? As a message? As proof? As a response to my anger? But the skeptical part of my brain, the part that had rejected faith in the first place, resisted. Miracles didn't happen. Not real ones. Not in tiny Portland apartments to unemployed graphic designers who'd torn up saints' pictures in fits of rage. I picked up my phone, thinking I should call someone. But who? My mother. She'd have no doubt this was a miracle, but I wasn't ready for her reaction. The joy, the I told you so's, the immediate insistence that I go to mass and confession. Jennifer? We weren't talking anymore. My friends? I drifted away from most of them, and the ones I still talked to would think I was having a breakdown. I realized I was completely alone with this impossible thing. I set down my coffee and picked up the picture again. Now that the initial shock was fading, I could examine my feelings more carefully. The anger from last night was gone, burned out. In its place was something more complicated. Fear, confusion, a strange sense of being seen. If this was a miracle, it meant someone or something had witnessed what I'd done, had seen my rage, my blasphemy, my destructive impulse, and instead of punishment or abandonment, there was this, restoration. The picture I'd torn apart was given back to me, whole. I thought about the prayer card that had come with the picture, the one I'd thrown in a drawer somewhere. What had it said? Something about Carlo Acutis being a model for young people, about his love for the Eucharist, about his famous quote, "The Eucharist is my highway to heaven." I'd found that quote corny when I first read it. A highway to heaven. It sounded like a bumper sticker, but maybe that was the point. Maybe Carlo had understood something about directness, about the simple path when everything else felt complicated. I stood up and went to my bookshelf where I'd shoved the prayer card between two books. I pulled it out and read it properly for the first time. Blessed Carlo Acutis, you were a model of holiness for young people and showed us that sanctity is possible in ordinary life. You loved the Eucharist and the Virgin Mary. Through your intercession, help us to grow in faith and love. Amen. Simple words. But as I read them, standing in my cold apartment with the impossible picture in my other hand, they felt different. Sanctity in ordinary life. That's what my life had been missing. Not success or relationship status or career advancement, but something sacred, something that made the ordinary bearable. I looked at the picture one more time. Carlo's expression seemed different now, or maybe I was different. That smile wasn't naive or disconnected from suffering. He'd died of leukemia at 15. He'd known pain. He'd known that life was short and often unfair, but he'd found something that made it bearable, and he was offering it to me now through this impossible restoration. I didn't know what to do with any of this. I wasn't suddenly filled with faith. I wasn't magically healed of my loneliness or anger. The job rejections were still real. Jennifer was still gone. My life was still a mess. But something had shifted. The picture sitting on my coffee table was proof that I didn't understand the world as well as I thought I did, that there were possibilities beyond what I could see or explain, that maybe, just maybe, tearing things apart wasn't the end of the story. I spent the rest of the morning sitting with the picture, turning over what had happened. I kept checking the envelope, kept examining the photograph for any sign of repair. There was nothing. It was perfectly, impossibly whole. Around noon, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I got on my knees beside my couch and tried to pray. I didn't know what to say. The formal prayers from my childhood felt wrong, too scripted. So I just knelt there in the silence and spoke from the raw, confused place inside me. I don't understand this, I said out loud. I don't understand what happened or why. I don't even know if you're real, if any of this is real. But if you are, if this means something, I need help. I need to figure out what to do next. I need to know I'm not alone in this. No voice answered. No vision appeared. The apartment was still cold and silent, but kneeling there with the restored picture on the table beside me, I felt something. Not certainty, not sudden faith, just the smallest opening. Like a door I'd slammed shut was now cracked open just enough to let in a sliver of light. I stayed on my knees for a long time. Eventually, I got up and put the picture back in its frame. I placed it on my bookshelf again, but this time I positioned it where I could see it from my desk, from my couch, from my bed. Over the next few days, I kept expecting to find some rational explanation. I researched online. Were there any materials that could self-repair? Could paper be treated with something that made it reconstitute? I found nothing that could explain what I'd experienced. I thought about telling my mother, but I wasn't ready yet. This felt too personal, too raw. I needed to understand it myself before I could share it. What I did do was start praying again. Not elaborate prayers or formal rituals, just honest conversations with God or Carlo or whoever was listening. I'd look at the picture and talk about my day, my fears, my anger, my hope. It felt awkward at first, like speaking a language I'd forgotten, but slowly something started to change. The loneliness didn't disappear, but it felt less crushing. The job rejections still hurt, but they didn't feel like evidence of cosmic abandonment. I started going to the church near my apartment, just sitting in the back during weekday masses, not taking communion, just being there. The picture sits on my dresser now. I moved it there a few weeks ago because I wanted to see it first thing when I wake up and last thing before I sleep. Every time I look at it, I remember that night, the anger, the tearing, the impossible restoration. I don't fully understand what happened. I've accepted that I might never understand it completely, but I know what I experienced. I know what I destroyed and what I found the next morning. And that knowledge has changed something fundamental in me. Maybe that's what miracles are supposed to do. Not to provide explanations or proof, but to crack open our certainty, to remind us that the world is bigger and stranger and more merciful than we imagine. To show us that what we tear apart can be made whole, that destruction isn't final, that restoration is always possible. I'm still in Portland. I'm still looking for work, still figuring out my life, but I'm not doing it alone anymore. The picture of Carlo Acutis is a constant reminder that someone is paying attention, that prayers matter, that even in our anger and doubt, were seen and met with grace. If this story of restoration has touched your heart, I encourage you to ask for Carlo Acutis' intercession in your own life. Subscribe to this channel for more inspiring testimonies of faith. Leave a like if this story moved you, and activate the notification bell so you never miss how God works through the saints in our modern world.